We all know that too much sugar is bad for us, right? And you might think it's just because sugar is empty calories, but sugar's dangers go far beyond that. Recent research has revealed shocking ways that it harms your body, and the good news is, cutting it out can transform your health much faster than you might think. So in today's video, I'm going to break it all down for you. And importantly, I'll reveal the damage it does to your liver, a danger that's far more common than you realise and often goes unnoticed until it's too late. By the end, you'll see exactly why quitting sugar for 30 days could make a life-changing difference. And the sooner you understand this, the sooner you can start turning your health around. When I decided to give up sugar, I didn't expect much to happen quickly. Like many people, when they quit sugar, I was just trying to lose a bit of weight. But within just a few days, I started feeling a difference that caught me completely off guard. I used to rely on snacks and caffeine to keep my energy up. Coffee and cereal in the morning, a snack mid-morning, lunch, and then another sugary bite to fight the afternoon slump. What didn't even cross my mind at the time was that I was stuck on a blood sugar roller coaster. Each snack gave me a quick high, which was inevitably followed by a crash, leaving me chasing the next hit just to get through the day. The sugar in tea, coffee, and many common foods, even the supposedly healthy ones, is absorbed rapidly, sending your blood glucose soaring. And what goes up must come down, triggering that all-familiar energy slump. And so the cycle repeats. Quitting sugar felt like stepping off that chaotic ride. Within days, I went from dragging myself through the day to waking up energized and staying that way. But this goes beyond physical energy. Your brain feels the brunt of the blood sugar roller coaster. It's no wonder. While your brain makes up only 2% of your body weight, it consumes a whopping 20% of your energy. So when your blood glucose is all over the place, you might experience brain fog, irritability, or difficulty concentrating. Within just a few days of quitting sugar, the fog begins to lift, your concentration sharpens, and you experience a mental clarity that in some cases, you might not have felt for years. But it doesn't stop there. Within weeks, the impact on your brain can go even deeper. Scientists are beginning to uncover how the brain's ability to use energy affects our mental health. Stabilizing blood glucose levels can help regulate mood and may even reduce symptoms of anxiety and depression. And what we do in the next 30 days could very well impact our brain health over the next 30 years or more. One of the scariest things about sugar's long-term effects is how it can be silently damaging the brain over decades. Over time, a high sugar diet can lead to chronic inflammation, which makes it harder for the brain to use glucose, its main fuel source. This can create what scientists call an energy crisis, where neurons are basically left starving. Reduced glucose metabolism in the brain is a hallmark of Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia. It's one of the reasons many researchers now call Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes. We may never have the definitive long-term studies proving sugar's exact role in dementia, but the potential risk is enough for me to act now. I'm not waiting for more evidence to make changes that could protect my brain health for decades to come. Let's talk about another way sugar affects our bodies. Hormonal health, specifically for men. Now, we often hear about women facing hormonal challenges as they age, but men experience significant declines in hormone levels too. While some of this is natural, research suggests that sugar might speed up the process. Here's how it works. Sugar spikes trigger a rise in cortisol, the body's main stress hormone. And put simply, when cortisol goes up, testosterone goes down. In fact, one study found that after a glucose-heavy meal, testosterone levels temporarily drop by as much as 25% for several hours. The effects of sugar go far beyond hormonal health. Blood glucose spikes can cause real physical damage to tissues throughout your body. And it's not just people with diabetes who need to worry. A 2018 study using continuous glucose monitoring found that even people with supposedly normal blood sugar levels experience significant glucose spikes. In fact, these healthy individuals saw their blood sugar levels spike into the pre-diabetic ranges 15% of the time, and even hit diabetic ranges 2% of the time. And you might be thinking, okay, so my blood sugar jumps every now and then. Isn't that normal? Well, even these short-lived spikes can quietly cause damage to sensitive areas like your blood vessels. You see, inside every blood vessel is a fine protective structure called the glycocalyx. It acts like a shield, keeping your blood vessels healthy, but it's highly sensitive to blood glucose spikes. You see, glucose causes damage through a process called glycation. It floats around, sticking to tissues like the glycocalyx, weakening them over time. Now, this is a big issue for people with type 2 diabetes who have elevated blood glucose levels all the time. But if your blood sugar is spiking 5 or 6 times a day after every meal and snack, you're causing repeated damages to these delicate tissues. The good news? When you quit sugar, those spikes disappear immediately. you're giving your body a chance to recover and potentially preventing bigger problems down the line, including cardiovascular disease. So did you know that all that glucose sticking to things inside your body can actually be measured? Well, there's a good chance you've actually had this blood test. It's called HbA1c, or just A1c in the US, and we use it to check for type 2 diabetes. But what it measures is glycation damage to hemoglobin, the molecule in your red blood cells that carries oxygen. The higher your blood sugar, the more glucose sticks to hemoglobin. Now, normally we'd wait 3 months to repeat this blood test, but here's the good news. If we checked it just 30 days after quitting sugar, you'd already start to see that number drop. And those glucose spikes don't just stick to hemoglobin. Glucose also sticks to other proteins throughout the body, creating harmful compounds called advanced glycation end products. Now, these don't just damage tissues, they also spark inflammation and disrupt your immune system, making it harder for your body to fight infections. And again, the good news is that cutting out sugar reduces the production of these harmful compounds, calming inflammation and allowing your immune system to focus on what it's supposed to be doing, protecting you from illness. And so hopefully you've started to see that quitting sugar has some incredible benefits. But let's be honest, for many of you, this won't be as easy as it sounds. So the human body is biologically wired to crave sugar. Our brains evolved to seek out sugar in a world where it was scarce. Fruit's the most abundant source of sugar in nature, but it's seasonal. Other, more concentrated sources, like honey, were rare and risky to collect. Imagine climbing tall trees and enduring bee stings, all for a small amount of honey that you ultimately share out with your community anyway. Compare that to today's world where sugar's everywhere. We can have as much as we want, whenever we want, with no effort or risk involved. That's where the challenge lies. The first few days of cutting sugar can be tough. You might experience cravings, discomfort, irritability. But if you push through that initial phase, you'll notice a real shift. Stick with it. You can do this. So the big question is, should you go cold turkey? The thing is, sugar's highly habit forming, just like alcohol. Even a small amount can keep cravings alive. Now, you wouldn't say just have one drink to someone who's trying to go sober. And sugar really isn't any different. Now, sure, sugar withdrawal symptoms can be uncomfortable, but they're not dangerous. Quitting sugar won't cause physical harm like alcohol withdrawal can, where some people who are heavily dependent might experience life-threatening seizures if they stop suddenly. The only exception to this is if you're diabetic and you're on blood glucose lowering medications. You'll want to talk to your doctor before cutting sugar to ensure your treatment is adjusted safely. For everyone else, cravings may get worse before they get better. But going cold turkey is the fastest way to reset your body's response to sugar. Just don't make the common mistake of switching to sweeteners. It might seem like a good compromise, but here's why that approach can backfire. Switching to sweeteners might seem like a great way to curb your cravings, but it's actually keeping them alive and preventing your body from resetting. When you cut out both sugar and sweeteners, something surprising happens. Your taste buds start to reset. And it doesn't take long, at most just a couple of weeks. Suddenly foods that once seemed bland taste richer and more complex. You notice the natural sweetness in berries, carrots, even certain nuts. Those intense cravings for sugary treats fade away, and things like soda or sweetened coffee start to taste overwhelmingly sweet, almost nauseatingly sickly. And you might think, hey, I've gone a bit crazy here. So if you've already cut out sugar, I'd really love it if you'd share your experience in the comments. Did your taste buds adapt like I said they would? Your story might just help someone else make the leap. And while you're down there, if you're finding this video helpful, give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future videos like this one. Okay, so we've talked about blood glucose, but that's only part of the story. When your blood sugar rises, your pancreas releases a hormone called insulin. Now, the main role of insulin is to get glucose out of our bloodstream into our cells where it then can be used. But insulin does much more than just lower blood sugar, and not all of it's good. So one of the lesser known effects of insulin is how it impacts your kidneys. High insulin levels signal your kidneys to retain fluid. Quitting sugar quickly brings two benefits. When your blood glucose levels drop, so do your insulin levels. This allows your kidneys to release that extra fluid, helping your body shed what's often called water weight. You might notice a quick drop on the scale, less puffiness, and reduced bloating. But it's not just about appearance, because your kidneys also regulate blood pressure. This drop in retained fluid often leads to a noticeable reduction in blood pressure, sometimes within just a few days. And again, this isn't just a quick win. High blood pressure is a major risk factor for heart disease and stroke, so even a small improvement now can make big differences in your long-term health. But let's be honest, most people think about quitting sugar for one reason: fat loss. And while it's true that cutting sugar reduces empty calories, that's just scratching the surface. Insulin signals your fat cells to store glucose as fat. When insulin levels are frequently elevated from regular sugar intake, your body basically gets stuck in fat storage mode. When you cut back on the sugar, everything changes. Lower insulin levels allow your body to access its fat reserves and burn them for energy. This is where real fat loss happens, not just shedding a bit of water weight. And insulin can also have serious implications for long-term health risks like cancer. We've already discussed how insulin promotes growth in fat cells, but it doesn't just stop there. Insulin is a growth-promoting hormone, and when levels are high, it can also stimulate the growth of many other types of cells, and that includes cancerous ones. Then there's the Warburg effect, a phenomenon where many cancer cells rely heavily on glucose for energy, consuming it far faster than normal cells. Now again, we don't have these conclusive long-term studies that show that cutting sugar prevents cancer, but there's strong evidence that lowering sugar intake reduces factors that promote cancer growth. For me, that's more than enough reason to act now rather than to wait for more definitive research to catch up. Okay, so we've talked about what happens when glucose and insulin spike frequently, but there's an even bigger issue eventually. Our bodies can stop responding to insulin the way they're supposed to. We develop a kind of resistance. Now, this idea of resistance won't be new to you. Think about alcohol. Someone who regularly drinks needs more alcohol to feel the same effects. Or pain medications like morphine. Over time, the body builds up a tolerance and needs higher doses. The frequent exposure to the substance, be it alcohol or morphine or insulin, causes resistance. When we're frequently exposed to high levels of insulin due to regular sugar intake, our cells stop responding to it properly. What that means is that your pancreas has to produce more and more insulin in order to have the same effect. It's like being in a noisy room where you have to shout louder and louder just to be heard. Eventually, your pancreas has to shout all the time just to get your cells to take up glucose. This is what we call insulin resistance. And once this resistance sets in, your insulin levels stay high much longer than they should. The medical term for this is hyperinsulinemia. And here's the problem. Those persistently high insulin levels affect almost every system in your body. You're stuck in fat storage mode, unable to burn fat for energy, which locks you in a cycle of hunger and weight gain. Your kidneys are constantly told to retain fluid. What do you think that does to your blood pressure? And your pancreas struggles to keep your blood sugar under control, putting you on a pathway to type 2 diabetes. By the time someone's actually diagnosed with prediabetes or type 2 diabetes, they've likely been insulin resistant for a number of years. And this is where modern medicine really falls short. We address it far too late. We should be preventing it much earlier. So insulin resistance and its knock-on effects are a big deal, but we've really only covered half of the issue. You see, when most of us think about sugar, we picture anything sweet that contains calories, and that's not far off. But most of the time, we're talking about sucrose, better known as table sugar. Now, sucrose is a disaccharide. That means it's made up of two single sugar molecules joined together. During digestion, it's split into two simpler sugars, which are absorbed almost immediately into your bloodstream. That's glucose and fructose. Now, we've already covered glucose, but what about fructose? Well, that's a whole different story. As you're about to see, it's arguably far more concerning for the human body than glucose could ever be. The fructose is often called the fruit sugar, and it's dismissed as harmless. But here's the thing, our bodies handle fructose very differently from glucose. That's where the problems start. While glucose can be used by nearly every cell in the body, fructose can't. It's sent straight to the liver, where it's the liver's job to deal with it. Once it's there, the liver's got two options. Firstly, it can convert fructose into something called glycogen. Now, glycogen's a short-term energy reserve that's broken down into glucose between meals. But the liver's capacity to store glycogen is very small, so it gets filled up pretty quickly. And when glycogen stores are full, the liver shifts to its second option, which is converting fructose into fat. Under normal circumstances, this is a good thing. The liver packages up that new fat that it's made and sends it out into the bloodstream, where it travels around the body to our fat cells and is taken up and stored for future use. That's exactly what should happen with excess energy. The real problem starts when the liver's overwhelmed by too much fructose. There's no choice but to turn the excess into fat, but it can only export the fat so quickly. When fat's been made faster than it can be sent out, it begins to build up inside the liver itself. This is how non-alcoholic fatty liver disease begins, a condition that mirrors alcoholic liver disease, but actually caused by fructose, not by alcohol. Once fat starts building up in the liver, it triggers a cascade of serious problems. And if you're thinking, this probably doesn't apply to me, it's probably rare, think again. 2022 study revealed that 70% of people who are overweight have some level of fatty liver disease. For those with obesity, that number rises to 75%. Those figures skew even higher if you're in the Americas. And what's more, many experts believe these figures are underestimates. And if you're thinking, well, I'd know if I had fatty liver disease, the reality is you probably wouldn't. Fatty liver disease is often silent in its early stages with no obvious symptoms. In fact, we usually pick it up by accident during tests for completely unrelated conditions. So what's the big deal here? Why is fat in the liver a problem? Well, this is where insulin comes back into play. It plays a crucial role in how the liver functions. Remember those glycogen stores that I mentioned earlier? The liver's short-term energy reserves broken down into glucose between meals? Well, normally insulin signals to the liver to hold off breaking down the glycogen when there's already plenty of glucose in the blood. Makes sense, right? But when fat builds up in the liver, it disrupts this process. The liver itself becomes resistant to insulin. It's like it's deaf to the signal. And instead of holding onto the glycogen, it starts breaking it down anyway, releasing more glucose into the bloodstream even when blood glucose levels are already raised. This sets off a chain reaction. Blood sugar levels that are already high climb even higher. The pancreas then responds by producing even more insulin to try and bring them down. And that more insulin leads to more insulin resistance. See, fat accumulation in the liver is the trigger point that drives insulin resistance, not just in the liver, but throughout the body, accelerating the pathway towards type 2 diabetes. Alarmingly, this often goes unnoticed even by doctors. And that led one diabetes expert to say, before the diagnosis of type 2 diabetes, there is a long, silent scream from the liver. And yes, it often develops over the course of years, but it can occur much faster. In fact, you might have seen it happening much faster without even realizing it if you watched the 2004 documentary Super Size Me. Now, the filmmaker Morgan Spurlock took on a 30-day challenge to eat exclusively from a well-known fast food chain. One of the rules of this challenge was that if he was asked, would you like to supersize that, he had to say yes. This meant he was drinking up to 42 ounces or 1.2 litres of sugar-sweetened beverages in a single sitting. That's a massive amount of sugar and one of the quickest ways to overwhelm the liver. Because Spurlock was undergoing regular blood tests during this challenge, he could track changes in his body. Within just 30 days, his tests already showed signs of liver damage. Now, I know this might seem like an extreme example, and it is, but it shows just how quickly sugar can impact the body. It doesn't always take years to develop, and unfortunately, we're now seeing this happen in children. So the big question is, will quitting sugar actually make a difference here? Well, as soon as you quit the sugar, you're stopping the influx of fructose hitting your liver. Your liver will keep exporting the existing fat, but it's no longer creating any new fat. Eventually, it should get back to normal. How long will it take? Well, that depends where you're starting from. In reality, we'd need a scan to see the change in liver fat content. For some, 30 days might be enough to see real progress. For others, it could take longer. But here's the key thing. For most people, the buildup of fat in the liver is reversible. And I've seen it happen time and time again. Honestly, this is one of the most powerful changes you can make for your health. Okay, so you've got a good idea about the dangers of sugar now that we've broken it down. But here's the thing. It doesn't just end with table sugar. Yes, it's the most obvious source, but if you stop there, you're missing a big part of the story. You see, glucose and fructose are hiding in so many different foods, sometimes in places you might not expect. And while cutting out table sugar is a great start, it's often not enough. We need to dig deeper and look at the different sources that can flood your body with these sugars. Let's start with something that's even worse than sugar: high fructose corn syrup. Food manufacturers avoid using regular sugar when they can. It's expensive. Instead, they turn to high fructose corn syrup, a highly processed man-made sweetener created from cornstarch. But high fructose corn syrup isn't just a cheaper substitute. It's different in two key ways which make it worse. It's typically 55% fructose and 45% glucose compared to the 50-50 split in sucrose. And unlike sucrose, it's already broken down into those more simple sugar molecules. This creates a double whammy. It hits the liver faster, and the extra fructose causes even more fat to build up. It's like they've taken all the bad stuff about sugar and turned the dial up to 11. Like sugar on steroids that's only designed with one thing in mind: profit. And so it's easy to see why a man-made, ultra-processed sugar substitute like high fructose corn syrup is bad for us. But here's where things get trickier. A lot of people assume that natural sugars are better for you. We're talking about things like honey and maple syrup, which, when we break them down, are almost identical to table sugar. Yes, they contain a tiny amounts of additional nutrients like vitamins and minerals, but that doesn't cancel out the harmful effects of glucose and fructose, in the same way that adding a little bit of lettuce to a Big Mac doesn't suddenly turn it into a salad. But the so-called natural sugar that really deserves attention is agave nectar. Now, agave has been marketed for years as a healthier alternative to sugar, mainly because it doesn't spike blood glucose as much. And technically, that's true, because it doesn't. And here's why. It's because it's about 20% glucose and 80% fructose. And so the very thing that makes agave look like a healthy choice on the surface is what makes it even worse when you dig deeper. Right, let's address the elephant in the room. I've been pretty down on fructose, and hopefully you understand why. But as I mentioned earlier, fructose is sometimes known as the fruit sugar because it's found in fruit. And isn't fruit supposed to be good for us? Well, let me explain why I'm not so sure that fruit really deserves the "it must be good for us" reputation. Now, all fruits contain sugar, but they're not all the same. Each fruit has a unique mix of sucrose, glucose, and fructose. And the proportions can vary quite a lot. I'll put this graphic up on the screen so you can see how different fruits stack up when it comes to their sugar makeup. As you'll notice, some are far higher in fructose, while others have more sucrose or glucose. No matter the mix though, it all breaks down into glucose and fructose in your body eventually. Now, fructose is often celebrated as the pinnacle of healthy eating. After all, it's packed with fiber, vitamins, and minerals, and all sorts of other good stuff, right? And yes, fiber does slow down how quickly sugar enters your bloodstream, helping to prevent those blood sugar spikes. And yes, fruit is undeniably rich in beneficial nutrients like vitamins, minerals, and phytonutrients. But it's equally true that fruit isn't some sort of magical source of essential nutrients that can't be found anywhere else in our diets. But the real issue, though, is that fruit today just isn't what it used to be. For generations, we've been tinkering with fruit, selectively breeding it to make larger, sweeter, juicier versions. And recently, genetic modification has taken that process even further. The result is modern fruits have far less fiber than their wild ancestors and far more sugar. Which do you think has more sugar? This medium-sized banana or this sugared donut? You guessed it. It's not just what fruit we eat that's changed, it's also when we eat it. And that makes a really big difference. Historically, fruit was only available seasonally, typically in late summer and autumn. For our ancestors, this wasn't just a quirk of nature, it was a survival mechanism, signaling them to store energy before winter when food would be scarce. Bears gorge on berries at the end of summer to pack on massive amounts of weight for hibernation. For humans, fruit likely served a similar purpose, helping to build energy reserves for tougher times. But today, fruit's available year-round. So here's the question. If fruit was nature's way of preparing us for winter, is it a really good idea to have year-round access to it in a world where winter never really comes? And there are two ways to consume fruit today that are particularly concerning, one of which was quietly downgraded in the UK's dietary guidelines back in 2016. Right, firstly, let's look at these grapes. Much of their weight comes from water. But when they're dried into raisins, that water's gone, leaving the sugar intensely concentrated. And a small handful of raisins contains the sugar equivalent of several dozen grapes. So dried fruit takes what might have been a moderate sugar hit and turns it into a concentrated sugar bomb that's really easy to overconsume. And then there's fruit juice. For years, it's been marketed as a healthy choice. When you break it down, it's shockingly similar to soda. A single glass contains the sugar of 4 or 5 whole oranges. And unlike whole fruit, juice has very little fibre to slow down the sugar's absorption. And so this is why the UK's healthy eating guidelines quietly sidelined recommending fruit juice as one of your 5 a day. But what about other forms of sugar we might not really think twice about? If you didn't know this already, Anything ending in ose is a type of sugar, including lactose, the sugar found in milk and dairy products. Like sucrose, lactose is a disaccharide, and when it breaks down, it splits into glucose and galactose. Now, galactose is quickly converted into glucose by your body, so lactose is basically all about glucose. There's no fructose involved. And the impact of lactose on your blood sugar depends really on how much you consume, like everything. A splash of milk in your tea, minimal impact on your blood glucose. But you're drinking multiple large lattes daily, that's a different story. With that much milk, you're adding a glucose load equivalent to around 20 teaspoons of sugar. And so yes, milk contains no fructose. And it might seem like we've dodged a bullet there, and you'd be forgiven for thinking that fructose is the main issue here. Unfortunately, it's more complicated than that. Because here's the thing. Once insulin resistance takes hold, glucose can actually become an even bigger problem. And it's not just those with diabetes or pre-diabetes who need to worry. And I apologize in advance to my American friends. I'm not trying to single you guys out here. It's just that many of the studies that are done happen to be done in the USA. But I'm pretty sure the figures that I'm about to share with you translate to much of the rest of the world too. Only 8% of US adults show no signs of metabolic dysfunction. That means 92% of adults are dealing with some level of impaired metabolic health. And this is important because we still haven't addressed the single biggest source of glucose in our diets. Do you remember the science experiment where you chewed a piece of bread and kept on chewing it without swallowing it? Eventually the bread starts to taste really quite sweet. That sweetness occurs because the starch in the bread is getting broken down into glucose. There's an enzyme in your saliva called amylase which makes this happen. And this is important because it underpins exactly what starch is. Starch, which is found in foods like bread, rice, pasta, noodles, potatoes, and many other things, is essentially long chains of glucose molecules all linked together. And whilst these foods don't taste particularly sweet, the starch starts getting broken down into glucose as soon as we put it in our mouths. Put simply, starch is concentrated glucose. And I want to put into perspective the sheer amount of glucose we get from starchy foods, because honestly, I think you'll be shocked. Now in the US, the average person consumes around 13.5 teaspoons of added sugar per day. But I want to just compare that to a single medium slice of white bread. According to the National Federation of Bakers, that slice contains 17 grams of starch, and all of that starch breaks down into glucose. So, eating a single slice of white bread will flood your bloodstream with the same amount of glucose that 8.5 teaspoons of table sugar would. And you might be thinking, yeah, but these starches get digested slowly, so they'll have a much slower impact on our blood glucose levels and are therefore better for us, right? Well, again, you might be surprised. You've probably heard of the glycemic index, a scale that measures how quickly food spikes your blood glucose levels. Pure glucose gets the top score of 100, whilst eggs have a score of 0 and broccoli has a score of 10. But common starchy foods tell a different story. That white bread has a glycemic index somewhere between 70 and 85. White rice is similar, 70 to 87. Brown bread has got a glycemic index of 50 to 65. This is better, but it's still not great. Boiled potatoes have a glycemic index up to 96, amongst the highest on the scale. The idea that starchy foods release glucose slowly doesn't always hold up. Many of these foods will spike your blood glucose levels rapidly. So, quitting sugar for 30 days. It's a great step and a really, really important one. But here's the thing. Cutting out sugar without addressing the colossal amount of glucose from starches, foods we're told should be the foundation of our diets, misses a critical part of the picture. Now, this is especially true if you're dealing with conditions like type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes, but also, crucially, insulin resistance, where your pancreas is going to have to produce bucket loads of insulin to deal with all that glucose from starch. So the big question I'm expecting many of you have at this point is, well, does this really apply to me? That's exactly what I'm going to cover in the next video. Just click the link on the screen right now and you're going to get taken straight to that. Thank you for watching.